Well, in our work, particularly over the last couple decades, we've distinguished or sort of resurrected in a very old distinction in research on learning, the distinction between learning and performance. This has a long history, goes back to learning theorists in the 1930s and 40s who disagreed about everything except probably the need to distinguish between learning and performance. So performance is what I can see, I can measure, I can observe right now. Learning is something I have to try to infer. That is, I have to say, have those relatively permanent changes happened that will support my performance on the long term. And the critical thing is that current performance is often such an unreliable indicator of whether learning's happened. So it can be a product of predictability, current cues that are present now but won't be present when we need the information later. All those things can sort of prop up performance and make you improve rapidly, but the learning that is the target of instruction under any normal circumstance may not be happening. So they're sort of dissociated. The older researchers showed that there can be considerable learning in the absence of observable changes in performance. So they did experiments on, for example, latent learning, where animals were allowed to just kind of wander in a maze that was all apparently aimless, but then when you introduced reward somewhere, you could see that the animal had learned the maze. Or experiments on what was called overlearning. After people are performing perfectly, you keep giving them learning trials, they're not changing their performance, but then you saw with forgetting or relearning that additional learning had happened. So there were a lot of these dissociations. Importantly, in more recent work, we've been able to demonstrate that the converse is true as well, namely that there can be pretty dramatic improvements in performance with virtually no resulting learning. And so this is a critical distinction because instructors can end up preferring poorer conditions over better conditions, instruction and learners too. So as far as an example of performance increasing, there would be situations where there's massed practice on something, the conditions are constant and predictable, there may be immediate feedback after every trial, and people can just appear to be acquiring it very rapidly. So performance, if you're plotting it during the training, can be going up quite substantially. But then what happens is at a delay or with any change, minor change in the task or the situational cues, it can appear almost as though nothing happened, that training never happened. So the converse of that's crucial, which is that when you introduce things like variability, spacing, reducing the feedback some, interleaving things to be learned rather than blocking the things to be learned, that appears to slow down the learning process and poses challenges for the instructor, but enhances long-term retention and transfer.